Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the KPC podcast. My name is Karsan Turner.
And I'm Hannah Thurman.
And today we decided to do something a little different. Instead of going over the regular political news, we figured since it is March, well, March is almost over, so we're maybe a little late to this, but everyone has these March Madness brackets, even if it has nothing to do with basketball. I've seen March Madness brackets for like band albums and band songs. So we decided to do our own March Madness bracket with the 2020 presidential candidates. So basically we filled out these brackets. We don't know what we selected, and we're going to go over them on the show. So we're going to go ahead and start out with Hannah's. And I think real quick, I'll justify the Republican side. So we got to get we have the bracket here. Starting out in red, I want to have a few caveats because I didn't want to just have Trump there. I wanted to kind of spice things up. So I think last week, Jeb Bush said someone needs to run against Donald Trump. And so I kind of figured, well, why don't you do it, buddy? So I put him on the list. I nominated him as president. No. And Rand Paul, he said he was voting against the declaration of the state of emergency. So I figured, maybe he would run against Trump. And then, of course, Howard Schultz pinning billionaire against billionaire. But Hannah, go ahead and talk about your bracket and what you filled out.
Yeah, okay. So I'm going to start on the left side because for the Republic, okay, I guess I'll start on the Republican side if I'm going to say this first.
Okay,
but yeah. I had Trump winning, not the presidency, but I had him, it was him against Paul, and obviously Trump is going to get the Republican nominee unless someone else comes out and is a strong candidate. There's just no way that he's not going to get the Republican nomination, whether Republicans like him or not. In Congress, he's going to get it. So on to the left side, the first two that are pinned up against each other, Bernie Sanders and Tulsi.
Yeah, Tulsi Gabbard.
So I put Sanders because I wasn't very familiar with the other one, and I didn't look it up because I was kind of thinking, if you don't know the name by now,
what's the point?
Especially with Sanders, he has so much traction from the last election. People really like him. He is great with a lot of the millennials. So I had him winning. But when it comes to Amy Klobuchar and Julian Castro, I had Klobuchar. A little bit of the same situation there. And I'm a Minnesota girl, so I really like Klobuchar. I think that she is going to do well. But when it comes to against Bernie Sanders, this is where it gets a little tricky because I think Klobuchar is really going to struggle getting momentum through the U.S., whereas Sanders already has that. He's already well known. I'm sure even if you're not familiar with the election, if you know Sanders somewhat, you could probably bang out what his platforms are, whereas Klobuchar, not so much. And she also came out not necessarily against universal health care, but that's a big Democratic issue, and a lot of people want that. But she didn't say that she would have that on the table if she became president. So I did put Klobuchar over Sanders just because I feel like people are getting tired of Sanders. Maybe that's just me. He's so old too. He fell in the shower the other day and had stitches on his head. So maybe Bernie just needs to stay home.
Yeah, if that happens in a couple months, he'll just be dead.
Right.
I think he's so old. He's
fragile. Old. Yeah. So then go down a quadrant. We have Joe Biden against John Hickenlooper. Obviously, Biden's going to win that one because he, like I said, he has attraction. And then Elizabeth Warren and Jay Inslee. I did a little research on Inslee because I wasn't familiar with the name. And I am, I'm not a very good fan of Elizabeth Warren after the whole Native American situation. I think some are. I think she's starting to gain a little bit more support that she lost after coming out and saying she wanted the Supreme Court to get bigger and that she wanted to get rid of the Electoral College because that was such a big problem with the last election because Hillary Clinton would have been our president if we didn't have the Electoral College. But I think that Jay Inslee could definitely come out on top. So I picked him because he does have his main thing is environmental, climate change. And so I feel like the people that really hone into that, he'll get all that support. Whereas Warren is just kind of lost in the sauce right now. She's just all over the place, I think. And then when it comes against Biden or Inslee, I put Biden. and then Biden goes on. Okay, and then my last two quadrants. So Kamala Harris, John Delaney, same kind of thing. Didn't look up John Delaney. Kamala Harris is going to win that one. And then Pete Buttigieg, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
I looked it up and then I forgot.
Yeah, I was going to, but I didn't. And then against Kirsten Gillibrand, I think that Pete could win this one. So I put him just because he's young. He I think he's going to get a lot of the LGBTQ votes. That's huge for him because he's is he the governor or is he he's a mayor?
I think he's like governor
the governor of Indiana. Okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, his track record looks great. So I think that if he does a good job of getting out there and letting people know who he is and campaigning, that he could definitely be a good candidate.
Which he already has. I know he's been on like Colbert Report, and I've seen him popping up everywhere. So he's already doing a good job getting his name out.
Yeah, this is the first time I had even heard of his name.
Wow.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll save this story for whenever I talk about him because I have a story about him. So
yeah. Do not forget. Okay, so then, but I ultimately had Harris winning just because I think she really blossomed with the whole Kavanaugh hearings. She's a strong, not idol, but someone that people view as a strong person. I think she would do really well. I think people like her. She's somewhat moderate too, so I think that will help her. Well, we don't know, especially with Democrats these days. As myself. Okay. Yeah. And then the last quadrant, O'Rourke and Andrew Yang. I put O'Rourke because we all know him. Lots of people love him. Lots of young people love him. So he's going to win that one. And then my hardest one was Cory Booker or Stacey Abrams. The problem that I had with this is that Cory Booker I thought was going to take it at first because same thing with Harris, he really blossomed after the Kavanaugh hearings. He got a lot of attention for that. He's been really outspoken lately. He's really sticking his foot out there. So I was like, okay, I feel like, he's kind of well-liked. He is well-liked. He's a good speaker. He is out there. So I was like, okay, I think that he would win. But then you have to realize that Stacey Abrams did this huge thing in Georgia it was. And she brought all these people out and in such a strong Republican state, she did so well, even if she didn't win. And so I think that she would be a really good competitor. So I put her over Cory Booker. So then when it comes to O'Rourke or Abrams, I did put Abrams, which this was another one where it was kind of sticky. I just feel like everyone loves Beto, but I'm starting to see it kind of diminish. So it's half and half now. A lot of people are joking about him on Twitter, oh, he's just for the millennials, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know. I think he has the potential to do really, really well. I just don't see him as a real presidential candidate. I just don't think he has what it takes to become the president right now. Down the road, I could definitely see him because he has some great characteristics that would make him a good president. But I think he has some things that are just kind of missing.
Yeah.
So I had Abrams first because, like I said, she did so well in Georgia. I think that a lot of people support her throughout the U.S. too, so I think she'll gain that support. So Harris or Abrams, I put Harris just because she already has more support. And she's in Congress so people can see where she stands, how she's voted in the past. Abrams, not so much. So then I have Biden or Harris. Ultimately, I picked Harris because I'm sick of Joe Biden, and I don't think that he can win this presidency at all. I really don't think he'll even get as far as I put him. But like I said, I don't think Klobuchar has as much support as Biden. So Harris or Trump. I left it blank, but I put Harris in it. But honestly, I don't know what to say as of right now, but I think once we start seeing the Democratic forums and everything and the debates, I think I'll feel a little bit more confident, but I might have to change that because right now I feel like Trump is going to get his second term. I will say that.
Yeah. Well, I have my bracket here. We'll pull up, and I think honestly almost I have the reverse of everything you selected.
Really?
Yeah. So we have mine. We're going to start with the Republican side. This one is identical, though. No difference. Yeah, as you can already see.
Wow.
Yeah, I've got a lot to say
Don't
about.
even know who he is.
Exactly, yeah. Okay, so starting off, of course, Donald Trump, in terms of popularity, is going to get the Republican nominee. I mean, we put Rand Paul there, but like...
Yeah, our right side is the same.
Yeah, that much. I thought about putting Jeb Bush as president as a joke, but I was like, no thanks. Yeah, so moving over to the first quadrant of the Democratic side, I think we have our first, maybe this part was similar. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. Yeah, okay. I put Bernie Sanders over Tulsi Gabbard because I wasn't too familiar with Tulsi Gabbard. Same thing you did. When a voter looks at the ballot, Tulsi Gabbard, well, I know who Bernie Sanders is, you know, so that's why that would be there. Looking at Amy Klobuchar, and same thing with, okay, so we have more similarities than we initially thought. Julian Castro picked Klobuchar because I think she's more recognizable. I remember when Julian, why did I say Julian? Spanish. Sorry, peeking out a little bit. But I was like, man, with a last name Castro, maybe you shouldn't run for president because Fidel Castro, maybe you should wait a few hundred years before you do that, or change your last name. Like, because I know Beto changed his first name. His first name's like Robert. It's like not even Beto. So, I mean, he could have done something like that. But that's why I have Klobuchar there. And then Sanders against Klobuchar. I think Sanders would probably win, even though... I'm not too enthusiastic about that choice, but again, playing in terms of popularity, that's why I would put him there. Second quadrant, I think this is maybe where we see some differences. I don't fully remember. No, not really. Oh, yeah. Okay, we do a little bit. Yeah, so Joe Biden, again, recognizable. I put Elizabeth Warren over Jay Inslee because I didn't know anything about Jay Inslee, but not to dox my high school principal, but his name was Jay Inslee, but it was spelled differently, so he's not the same guy. But I think Elizabeth Warren might be in the same position that I think what a lot of Democrats were frustrated with in 2016 is Hillary Clinton seemed to have just like not cheated, but she just kind of became the nominee. I think there were some leaked documents that suggested that the DNC did some roundabout ways to ensure her spot as the nominee over Sanders. And I think Warren is going to get that same type of treatment until she goes up against Joe Biden, who has a little bit more of leeway since he was the vice president. So that's why I have him there. You can see it peeking out a little bit. But moving on into the last quadrant, I think this is where the heat picks up. So same reason for Jay Inslee, put Kamala Harris in front because she's more recognizable. She's just been doing a lot more. And then Pete Buttigieg and Kirsten Gillibrand, put Pete because I've seen him around a lot more. And he came to Kansas around this time last year. He gave a speech, and I was working for the not working for the Kansas Democratic Party, but I recorded that speech and. What happened? Oh, I put it up on YouTube, where my personal YouTube is for all my video projects. And whenever I uploaded it, one view. And now it's getting a lot of views. It has over 100. And so thank you for the free clout, Pete Buttigieg, which is why, as you can see slightly over there, I have him winning because he helped me out. So I have no choice but to help him out a little bit. But final quadrant is where we really see the mix-up. So between Beto O'Rourke and Andrew Yang, I actually have a lot to say about this. So I think Beto and Andrew are in similar situations where Beto O'Rourke, based off of what people have told me, is he's a Democrat, but he seems to be a little bit more moderate. He's not the typical Democrat that we're seeing from Cory Booker, Kamala Harris. And Andrew Yang is kind of in that same boat. He worked in Silicon Valley his whole life, and basically the platform that he's running on is ensuring that the working class still has a place in America. Because we look at the advancement of technology, especially with automation, self-driving cars are going to basically kill all truck drivers. They're not going to have jobs, and that's a big problem because you're basically alienating, I think, 3 to 10 million Americans, and they're going to be unemployed. The other thing he was running on is, the other problem with that is these truck drivers, they just have a high school education or they're, from the military. So even though they could go to college for free, they're choosing not to. And so that's something he really spoke out against. And I think he's been doing work like that his whole life, or, a lot of the stuff he's been doing in Silicon Valley has to do with that. And then I also think he kind of has a funny basic income of $1,000 a month, which I personally think is really stupid because once everyone gets $1,000 a month for free, then $12,000 is useless. You know, if everyone gets it, it's kind of like the same thing with college being free for everybody. Then the high school education is technically free for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it today and it's like, well, you have to go to college because everyone goes to high school. Well, if college is free, then everyone goes to college. Then it's like you have to go to grad school, you know? So the more free school we press, which don't get me wrong, I don't like the current tuition that I'm paying right now. I definitely want it to be reduced a significant amount, but I don't know, the universal policy prescriptions, they always sound really good in practice, but they don't always play out well. But he's also spoke out against tech censorship, which has been a huge problem with moderates and conservatives. And actually, a lot of conservatives are jumping off of their support for Trump in 2020 and going to Andrew Yang because he supports the working class and supports, or he doesn't want the big tech corporations to be censoring speech, because once you lose dialogue, you basically lose your nation because you're losing the truth that needs to be spoken. Between Cory Booker, Stacey Abrams, I just put Cory Booker because I knew his name. I wasn't as familiar with Stacey Abrams, but because I was like, does it matter who I pick? Because Andrew Yang is going in next. So the next quadrant that I have here, or from the top again, we'll start breaking it down between who did I have at so Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. I put Bernie Sanders because people are tired of Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, but I think they're more tired of Joe Biden than Bernie Sanders. Because I also think about a lot of Sanders supporters, once he lost the nomination, they went to Trump because Trump, similar to Sanders, preached to the working class, which Sanders hasn't even done on his 2020.
Really? Sanders to Trump?
Yeah. It wasn't like every Sanders supporter.
Yeah.
It was maybe like 10%, but I think, if I think thinking about a Democrat who would pick between the two, or a moderate, because I'm also considering the high number of Trump supporters that are disappointed in his presidency and they're jumping off the Trump train to go somewhere else. I think they'd pick Sanders before they picked Biden, so that's why I put him in the next spot. And then moving down to the next, is it a quadrant? It's not four of them. Double next people. Put Andrew Yang because in popularity, I think he was on the Joe Rogan podcast and it has a couple million views, and he's even reached out to a lot of conservative commentators, and he's appearing on a lot of opposite side publications, I guess. He was actually on Tucker Carlson's show, and Tucker Carlson, he didn't even ask him about like, oh, what do you think about the Second Amendment or whatever, because he was just so refreshed to hear someone talking about the fears of automation and tech censorship when not even Republicans are talking about it. And so I think he's doing a really good strategy of, instead of running on the platform that I notice a lot of these candidates are, which you kind of have to do, is just bash Trump. And he's focusing more on what he can build up and instead of what he can tear down. And I think that's what's going to ultimately save him in the end. And he started out as a nobody, and he's gaining in popularity. And especially if he can sway those Trump voters who are dissatisfied, that Democrats are going to vote blue regardless, right? So if you're getting those red people to come over to your side, you're getting a lot of support, and you're doing a lot right. So between Yang and who'd I have? Sanders?
Yes.
Put Andrew Yang, again, put him in. And between the two, though, Donald Trump and Andrew Yang, I do think Trump, much like how you said, is going to get reelected. I would be very surprised if Andrew Yang won. But yeah, and I think another reason I picked him is because he's a lot younger. I was talking to Adam about this before the show, but there's a limit on how young you can be to run for president, but there should also be a limit on how old you should be.
You know what? I like that idea because Sanders, I'm sorry, he is just so old.
Yeah.
And I just don't understand how, he could easily die during presidency.
Yeah. So maybe they are reptiles. I don't know.
Maybe. I want to make a comment. I think it was Pete, I'm not even going to try to say his last name. But when I was researching a little bit, I forgot to mention this when I was going through my bracket. He had made a comment that was questioning why no one's pressing male candidates or female candidates to have a male vice president, which I thought, if you're
okay, yeah,
so because everyone's like,
VP.
kind of like if Joe Biden were to have a woman vice president nominee, like everyone's like, good for you, Joe Biden. But then he was like, well, why aren't
you have to? Yeah.
And I thought that was a little risky for him to say because he is in the Democratic Party.
Right.
So
and that's
probably a bad place to start. But
yeah, I'm really curious to see how these debates are going to start playing out because, well, I think there's a lot of. I think the Democratic Party is very scattered, and this was the case with the Republican Party. I mean, that's how Trump won, because they didn't know what to do about Obama. So we're seeing the same thing here. And once the debates start and we kind of weed out the weaklings and start to see who's really going to be, have the highest chances of being the nominee, I think that's when it's going to be a lot more interesting. And I'm surprised that, candidates or just any campaign that current party out of power doesn't focus on what they can be doing in terms of building instead of just attacking the president. I think
that's why Yang actually does look like a good candidate because, I mean, I think in order to get a Democratic president, it has to be a moderate. But the problem with that is there's no way that a moderate's going to win the general or the nomination, excuse me. And so I mean, but I feel like a lot of people realize that, like, we need a moderate candidate in order to beat Trump.
And even Howard Schultz, I think he tried to play into this by saying, like, I would seriously consider running as a moderate, but I wouldn't be fooled by that. He's donated to Democratic platforms his entire life, so to just kind of change on a whim, now that he's 90,000 years old, he retired. He couldn't even be CEO of Starbucks. He had to step down. And so it's like, oh, I can't be CEO of Starbucks. However, I could be president. But maybe Starbucks is bigger than the United States because it's global. I don't know. Which because they've done a lot of good things for their employees and stuff. Like you get free Spotify Premium if you're like a Starbucks worker. But I hate Spotify Premium. I had to cancel it this week because I
love Spotify.
They don't show when you click on an album. It used to show how long the album was. Now they don't do that anymore. So
And that really just made you upset?
Oh, yeah. I canceled it and then subscribed to Apple Music in like 5 minutes. And Apple Music's a lot better, but our March Madness brackets are the topic of this podcast. So in closing, I think we kind of did wrap it up. We're just going to see how this all turns out.
Yeah, we're definitely going to cover the debates when they come. There's been a couple like town hall meetings with, like, I know Jake Tapper had covered one, or was the moderator. But once these debates start rolling, we'll definitely have more to say on this.
It'll be interesting. So it's finally our season. Whenever the football team or football fans are talking about how excited they are, or basketball, we're like, what is that? But now finally we can talk about something that's exciting. So thanks for tuning in to this episode of the KPC podcast. We'll see you next week. Other than that, I'm Karsan Turner.
And I'm Hannah Thurman.
We will see you next week.